The transmission came in broken and faint, almost lost beneath the static. Captain Mark Hale leaned over the radio, straining to catch the words through the hiss of snow and interference. Somewhere in the mountains of Nepal, a Soviet science team had gone silent. Command believed it might be a weapons test gone wrong. Hale had been sent to find out. The air inside the transport plane was heavy with fuel and cold metal. Steam sat across from him, faces hidden beneath scarves and helmets. They were all veterans of shadow operations, men trained to move quietly, where borders blurred and politics denied their existence. Hale checked his notes again. The Soviets had been stationed at an outpost near the upper Langtang Valley. The region was officially neutral ground, off-limits to both NATO and Warsaw Pact activity, which meant neither side could afford to be caught there. Their cover story was a search and rescue mission for a lost civilian survey crew. The pilot called over the roar of engines that they were approaching drop altitude. The ramp opened, flooding the cabin with cold, thin air. The world outside was white and endless. Hale adjusted his goggles and gave the signal. One by one, the team dropped into the void. The parachutes opened soundlessly against the snow-bright sky. The wind tore at their suits, and the mountains rose up like frozen teeth beneath them. Hale hit the ground hard, but steady, rolling with practiced control. The cold was immediate and absolute. They regrouped in silence, checking gear, forming up in two columns. The Soviet outpost lay 6 miles north through broken terrain. With no radio contact and limited daylight, Hale ordered direct route. As they moved, the storm closed in again. Snow swirled around them, muting sound, blurring distance. At times, Hale could barely see the man in front of him. Once, he thought he heard something behind them, a distant crunch of snow. When he turned, there was nothing but the white. By late afternoon, they reached the first sign of the Soviet presence. A radio antenna jutted from a ridge, bent nearly in half. Small generator cabin stood nearby, its roof half collapsed. No footprints, no tracks, no sound but the wind. Inside, the equipment was frozen solid. Hale brushed frost from a control panel and found claw marks on the metal casing. Deep, uneven bruise, as though something massive had tried to rip the machinery open. He called to his sergeant, Avery, who moved in to take a look. Avery's eyes narrowed. Animal, maybe, but nothing human. Hale agreed quietly. They set a perimeter and pressed on. As darkness fell, the storm finally broke. The stars came out sharp and cruel, and the valley opened before them like a wound. In the distance, lights flickered where the Soviet outpost should have been. A faint orange glow pulsed through the snow, too erratic for fire, too steady for flares. The men watched in silence. Hale raised his binoculars. Through the lenses, he saw the outline of the base, half buried in snow. No movement, no guards. The glow came from inside one of the larger buildings, leading through the cracks in the walls. He felt something tighten in his chest, a quiet instinct born from years of experience. Nothing about that light was natural. They approached carefully, weapons ready. The outer fences were torn open. Something large had forced its way through from the inside. In the snow, they found tracks, wide, deep impressions that sank inches into the crust. Whatever made them was heavy, upright, and not wearing boots. Inside the main building, the heat was gone. Frost hung from the ceiling like glass. The walls were marked with strange residue, dark and dry. A table lay overturned. Several chairs were shattered. No bodies. Then Hale saw it. On the far wall, written in what looked like frozen blood, Cyrillic letters, rough and uneven, scrawled in panic. The last word was clear enough to read. It meant, "Run." A low sound rose from outside. Not the wind this time, but something heavier, moving through the snow. Hale raised his hand. The team froze. Through the broken doorway, a shadow passed, tall and silent. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Then it stopped, turned, and was gone. To the night. Ben waited, breath held. The silence stretched until even the snow seemed to listen. Hale whispered for them to hold position. Whatever was out there, it was not done with the valley yet. He switched off his light and looked through the window. The darkness beyond the outpost seemed alive, shifting faintly under the moon. Somewhere, far across the frozen ridge, something answered the silence with a deep, distant cry. The sound was not human, but it was not entirely animal either. Hale felt it in his bones before he heard it fade. The beginning of something old, cold, and waiting. The storm moved in before dawn, a wall of white that erased the world beyond 20 feet. The wind hammered the tents, tearing one loose before they could secure it. Hale called the team together and ordered minimal movement until visibility improved. They would wait it out, conserve fuel and rations, and reassess their heading once the snow broke. Inside the main shelter, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and damp canvas. The men sat close, trying to keep morale intact. Jensen checked the batteries on the radios again and again, as if that would bring the signal back. Private Laird, the quietest of the group, sharpened a knife with slow, steady strokes that grated against everyone's nerves. Sergeant Avery brewed weak coffee over the stove and passed tin mugs around. Hale sat apart, reviewing the map. The coordinates from command pointed them toward a valley north of their position, a narrow corridor that the Soviets had used for drone testing during the late 70s. Now it was just a dead zone. No patrols or settlements, only ridgelines and silence. Avery broke it first. "You think what we saw last night was real? I saw something move," Hale said. "It was upright, large and fast. Could have been a man," Avery offered, though his tone lacked conviction. Hale looked at him. "A man that leaves prints a foot deep." The tent fell quiet again. Jensen shifted uneasily and muttered, "Whatever it is, we should not be chasing it blind." "We are not chasing anything," Hale replied. "We are confirming intelligence. Nothing more." It was the kind of answer that sounded official, but comforted no one. By midday, the wind eased. The snow kept falling, thick and silent, but they could see enough to move. Hale decided they would follow the valley north. If they found more tracks, they would document them and return. That was the plan. They broke camp, moving single file through waist-deep powder. The landscape was featureless, every ridge blending into the next. After several hours, they reached the mouth of the valley. The wind died completely there, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. "Feels wrong," Avery said quietly. Hale agreed, though he did not say it aloud. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no shifting snow, no sound, except the crunch of boots. Then they saw the tracks again. This time, they were fresher, pressed into the snow with such depth that each footprint had a faint outline of melted ice at the bottom. Whatever had passed through here had done so within hours. Jensen crouched beside one. "Same pattern as before," he said. "Two-legged, long stride." Hale nodded. "And heavier." They followed the trail deeper into the valley until it split into two directions. One path led toward a cluster of ice caves that glowed faintly blue under the weak light. The other turned west into a slope of broken rock. Hale studied the ground. "Avery, take Laird and check the western path. Jensen and I will take the caves. We regroup in 1 hour." Avery frowned. "You sure about splitting up?" "It is reconnaissance," Hale said. "Stay in range." They exchanged a brief nod, then separated. Inside the ice caves, the air was colder, but still. The walls shimmered like glass. Hale and Jensen moved slowly, flashlights sweeping across frozen surfaces that looked as though they had been smoothed by centuries for wind. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Scratches lined the ice, vertical and parallel, as if claws had dragged along it. "Looks like something tried to dig its way out," Jensen said. Hale ran a handlight over one of the gouges. The marks were deep. He imagined the force it would take to carve them, and felt the uneasy weight of that thought. They advanced another 20 meters before finding something half buried under snow, a torn piece of fabric, stained dark. Hale picked it up. It was a scrap of uniform, Soviet issue. He turned it over and saw what looked like blood frozen into the fibers. Jensen's face paled. "Sold is not just us out here." "Keep your eyes open," Hale said, "and your voice low." They found a small metal canister. A few minutes later, dented and cracked. Cyrillic lettering covered one side. Hale brushed the frost off and read it. "Biologicheski material. Handle with care." He stared at it for a long moment. Biological material. Jensen shifted behind him. "Captain, bag it," Hale said. "We will examine it later." As they turned back toward the entrance, the air shifted. A faint vibration rolled through the cave floor, like a low growl trapped in the ice. Jensen froze, flashlight trembling in his hand. "Something's moving," he whispered. "Lights out," Hale said softly. They stood in darkness, breathing shallowly. For several seconds, there was only the quiet hum of the wind outside. Then came a sound, faint but distinct, from somewhere deeper in the tunnels. A dragging step, then another, slow, heavy, deliberate. Benson's hand found his rifle. Hale waited, heart hammering, listening to the rhythm. 2 steps, a pause, 2 more, then silence. He counted 10 seconds, then whispered, "Back out, slow." They moved carefully, retreating step by step toward the mouth of the cave. When daylight finally broke across the ice, both men exhaled at once. Outside, Avery and Laird were already waiting. They looked uneasy. Hale saw why. Behind them, the snowfield was churned up, prints scattered in every direction. Something had moved through fast, circling them. "Thought we were being stalked," Avery said. "Did not see anything clear, just shapes." Laird held up a torn strap from one of their packs. "This was on the ground when we turned around." Hale scanned the horizon. The valley was empty again, perfectly still. They did not stay to look for more. He gave the order to fall back toward their previous camp and re-establish contact with command. Whatever they were chasing was no longer a theory. It was real and watching them. That night, They set extra guards and kept their weapons close. The radio was dead, only static. The cold gnawed through every layer of gear. Around midnight, Hale woke to a faint sound just outside the tent, a shuffle in the snow. Then breathing, he reached for his sidearm, holding still. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a low, almost human moan. He flicked the tent flap open with one hand and aimed the flashlight. For an instant, the beam caught a face. Not human, not fully animal either. Wide eyes glinting like frost, skin pale and rough as stone, framed by white fur. The creature froze in the light, then turned and vanished into the storm with surprising speed. Hale stepped outside, scanning the slope, but it was gone. Only its footprints remained, circling the camp and disappearing into the dark valley beyond. When morning came, he gathered the team. "It is not Soviet," he said flatly. "Not a man in a suit. Whatever this thing is, it is intelligent enough to watch us and cautious enough not to strike." Jensen swallowed. "Then what do we do?" Hale looked at the horizon, where the wind was already picking up again. "We follow it. We find out what we are dealing with before it finds someone else." They moved again at dawn. The cold cut deep, and the wind rose against them. But Hale pushed the team forward, following the tracks that led away from camp. The prints were erratic this time, no longer a straight path. Whatever they were tracking was circling, doubling back, always keeping distance, but never leaving completely. The terrain narrowed into a steep ravine, hemmed by cliffs that caught the wind like a funnel. The snow was packed hard, the surface shining under a pale sun. Hale motioned for silence, raising a hand. Every sound echoed, their breaths, their steps, even the rustle of jackets carried too far. Avery joined him at the front. "Captain, if it wanted to hit us, it has had plenty of chances." "I know," Hale said. "That is what worries me." They reached a ridge that opened into a broad, bowl-shaped valley, surrounded by ice walls. At the far end stood a ridge of rock, half buried in snow. In front of it, they saw movement, a figure, tall, covered in thick white hair, standing upright, its shape nearly human, but broader in the shoulders, longer in the arms. It was facing away, head tilted, as if listening to something deep within the wind. Jensen whispered, "My God!" Hale raised his binoculars. Through the glass, he could see details that should not have existed outside of myth. The creature's fur was matted with frost, its skin mottled gray beneath. Its breath steamed in the air. It looked powerful, yet its movements were slow, cautious. Avery lifted his rifle. "Orders, Captain." Hale hesitated. The thing was not attacking. It not moved since they spotted it. It was just standing there, alone in the white. "Hold fire," he said quietly. "We observe first." The creature turned then, and for the first time, Hale saw its face. It was not the face of a monster. Its features were rough, but intelligent. The eyes were dark and alert. It blinked once in the sunlight, then stepped backward, wary but unafraid. A sound reached them, low and mournful, something between a call and a groan. It carried across the snow like an echo from the earth itself. The men froze. Then another sound joined it, sharper, almost mechanical, a crack, followed by a whistling hum that rose and died. Hale recognized it instantly. Gunfire, not theirs. Down, he barked, and they dropped, As a burst of automatic fire ripped through the valley, snow exploded near the creature, scattering ice and debris. It roared and leapt sideways, moving with astonishing speed toward the ridge. Hale spun toward the sound. From a ledge above the valley, a small team of men in white Soviet gear had appeared. They were firing short bursts, trying to drive the creature into the open. One of them carried a pack marked with the same biohazard symbol they had seen on the canister in the cave. "Contact left," Avery shouted, returning fire. The air filled with the snap of bullets and the crack of rifles. Hale and his men spread out, taking cover behind ice formations. The Soviets retreated behind their ledge. After a few exchanges, the creature had vanished into the ridge, leaving a trail of disturbed snow behind. The echoes of gunfire faded until only the wind remained. Hale regrouped the team. 2 of the Soviets were down on the ledge. The others had fallen back out of sight. He scanned the slope. "We are moving up," he said. "I want to see what they were doing." They climbed the ledge, finding discarded equipment half buried in the snow. Several dart casings littered the ground. Hale picked one up and saw the needle glint in the light. "Sedative rounds." Avery joined him. "So, they were not trying to kill it. They were trying to capture it." "Looks that way," Hale said. Which means Command was right about one thing. The Soviets were experimenting with something. He examined the downed soldiers. One still clutched a broken syringe, his eyes frozen open. There were deep wounds on his torso, torn through thick clothing. The edges were jagged, irregular, not from claws, but from something sharper, more deliberate. Avery glanced at the injuries. "Does not look like the same creature." "No," Hale said. "This was something else." They set up a small observation post near the ridge that evening. The storm clouds were gathering again, bruised and heavy. As darkness fell, Hale studied the prints round the ledge. Some belonged to the creature, but there were others, smaller and more erratic, as if something crawled on all fours and dragged part of itself through the snow. Jensen approached quietly. "Sir, we got movement on thermal." Hale turned to the monitor. Through the static haze of the scanner, 2 heat signatures flickered at the base of the ridge, one tall and upright, the other low and shifting, constantly moving. 2 contacts, Jensen said. "One's the same size as before." Hale adjusted the focus. A smaller shape darted toward the larger one with unnatural speed. The taller figure turned to meet it. And for a split second, the thermal display flared white. Then both signatures vanished from view. A heavy rumble followed, a deep impact from somewhere inside the ridge. The men grabbed their weapons, but nothing emerged, only silence. Avery exhaled slowly. "Whatever that was, it is still out there." Later, as the others rested, Hale stepped outside alone. The night was calm for the first time in days. Stars glittered overhead, sharp and cold. He thought about the yeti, about the look in its eyes. It had not been rage, it had been fear. He crouched near the tracks, leading into the ridge. The snow around them was disturbed, but the prints were clear. 2 sets again, one from the larger creature, and one smaller, irregular. The smaller tracks ended abruptly, vanishing into a smear of blood frozen in place. Hale followed them to a narrow crevice in the rock. Inside, he saw bones, small, scattered, some stripped clean, others crushed. The flesh that remained was blackened, almost burned. A new unease settled in his stomach. Whatever the Soviets had made or awakened was not the yeti. It was something else entirely. He heard movement behind him and turned sharply, flashlight ready. A shadow shifted across the snow. The beam caught a shape at the mouth of the ridge. The yeti was there again, standing half in the light, half hidden by stone. Its chest rose and fell heavily, its eyes locked on him. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then it stepped back, gaze flicking toward the mountains beyond, as if urging him to leave. When it turned, Hale noticed the deep wound across its shoulder, still bleeding into the snow. "Wait," Hale said softly, but the creature was already gone, swallowed by the dark. He stood there in the cold for several minutes, listening. The mountains were silent again, but that silence no longer felt empty. It felt like a warning. By morning, the weather had turned again. The sky hung low and gray, and snow fell in slow, heavy sheets that made every breath sting. Hale gathered the men around the dim lantern in the tent. They were exhausted, silent, each one aware now that they were dealing with something far beyond their orders. Avery rubbed a hand across his beard. "So, what do we do, Captain? If that thing is not hostile, then what are we chasing?" Hale set his logbook on the map. "We are not chasing anymore. We are investigating. Whatever the Soviets built or found up here, it is killing their men. I want to know why." Laird shifted uneasily. "And if it comes for us next, then we defend ourselves," Hale said. "But no one fires unless I give the word." No one argued. They were past arguing. They packed their gear and climbed toward the ridge where Hale had seen the bones the night before. Snow had covered much of it, but the crevice was still visible. They moved in cautiously. The inside smelled of iron and rot. Frost littered across the remains of old equipment, cracked canisters, and shattered glass vials. The floor was slick with ice, stained dark where something had melted through. Jensen crouched beside a fragment of metal. "These markings match the Soviet weather station," he said. "Same lettering." Avery knelt nearby and lifted a torn sheet of paper half frozen to the floor. The writing was Cyrillic, but one word stood out in English: Project Karsus. Hale took the page and studied it. "Karsus," he repeated. "Bet that in a bag." At the back of the crevice they found a tunnel. It was narrow, too clean to be natural. The walls had been cut by tools. The metal supports rusted with age. They followed it carefully, lights flickering across old wiring and frozen machinery. The air grew warmer as they went, damp with an odd chemical scent. The tunnel opened into a chamber. In the center stood a series of metal cages, all empty but one. Inside lay a mass of what looked like tissue fused with machinery, frozen solid in the shape of something that might once have been human. Tubes and bone twisted together, half buried in frost. Laird took a step back. "What is that?" "An experiment," Hale said quietly. "Or what is left of it." He moved closer, inspecting the metal plaque on the cage. The text was faded, but he could make out a few words. "Biodaptive specimen, genus unknown." He looked up. They were trying to make something that could survive the cold. Something stronger than the man or animal. Jensen stared, and they lost control. A sound cut through the chamber, sharp and hollow. A metallic scrape from the far side of the room. Everyone froze. Avery raised his rifle. Movement. They spread out, lights sweeping the corners. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a low, wet hiss. Hale felt his pulse quicken. The beam of his flashlight passed over something that glistened just beyond the machinery. It moved into view, crawling from behind the cages. At first, It looked like a man, but wrong in every proportion. Its limbs were too long, its skin stretched thin and pale, veins dark beneath the surface. The head tilted unnaturally, the mouth split wide and raw. Where its eyes should have been were only deep, dark pits that seemed to absorb the light. The men drew back as it rose slowly to its full height. It stood nearly as tall as the yeti they had seen, but thinner, almost skeletal, its back ridged like exposed bone. The sound it made was not an animal cry, but something closer to breathing through broken glass. Laird panicked first, firing a short burst. The rounds hit the creature squarely, throwing fragments of ice and tissue into the air. It staggered, but did not fall. Then it moved, impossibly fast, straight at them. Hale shouted for cover as the thing struck, its arms swinging like a whip. The impact sent Avery crashing against the wall. Jensen fired again and again, bullets tearing chunks from its torso, but the creature kept coming, silent now except for that rasping breath. Hale grabbed a flare from his pack and ignited it. The red light filled the chamber, and the creature recoiled, screeching as the brightness touched its skin. Smoke rose from its flesh. Hale waved the flare in front of him and yelled, "Back!" Out of the tunnel, they retreated toward the entrance. The creature followed only a few steps before stopping at the edge of the light, as if it could not bear to pass into it. It stood there, shuddering, before sinking back into the dark. Outside, the team collapsed against the snow, gasping. Avery's shoulder was bleeding, his jacket torn. Jensen was shaking, still gripping his rifle. "What in God's name was that?" Laird said. Hale caught his breath. "The real experiment. The Yeti is not what killed the Soviets. The thing is," he turned to look back at the tunnel. The air that drifted from it carried a faint, sour heat. They created something alive, but it did not stay under their control. Maybe it fed on what they gave it. Maybe it adapted. Jensen looked at him. "And the Yeti, trying to survive," Hale said. "Maybe it has been hunting that thing all along." They tended to Avery's wound and built a small fire to keep watch. The storm had passed, leaving a cold clarity that stretched across the peaks. Hale used the brief calm to study the papers they had recovered. Most of it was scientific shorthand, but a few lines translated roughly to Prototype 1, unstable, aggressive metabolic acceleration, reacts to light and heat, terminated. He closed the file. "Terminated," he said softly, "but it is still alive." That night, they set guards again, though none of them slept. The mountains were silent, too silent. Then, at midnight, came a distant cry. It was the same sound they had heard before, deep and haunting, echoing from the far side of the ridge. This time it was answered by another noise, sharper and more alien, like metal grinding through ice. The two sounds rose together, one natural, one not, until they merged into a single echo that faded into the night. Hale gripped his rifle tighter. Somewhere out there, two ancient forces were colliding, and his team was trapped in between. The following morning arrived gray and breathless. The wind was gone, leaving an eerie stillness that made every sound too clear. Hale stood outside the tent, staring toward the ridge, where the tunnel lay hidden beneath a blanket of snow. The others moved quietly behind him, their exhaustion visible in every motion. They had one goal left now: get proof, get out alive. Avery's wound had been cleaned and wrapped, though his arm hung stiff. He approached Hale, his face pale under a layer of frost. Command will not believe this, sir. They will believe what we bring them, Hale said, if we make it down. He adjusted his gear and looked toward the north slope, where faint smoke rose in the distance. The Soviets were still out there, somewhere between the mountains, likely trying to contain what they had unleashed. But the thing in the tunnel was not contained, and Hale had no intention of leaving it behind for anyone else to find. By midday, they were moving again. The snow underfoot was hard and slick, scattered with shards of ice blown from the ridge. Each step echoed against the cliffs. As they neared the old tunnel entrance, Hale signaled for silence. The air was warmer here again, the faint chemical scent returning, stronger now. Steam curled from cracks in the rock. They descended into the tunnel, weapons ready. The corridor seemed different this time, the walls breathing faint heat, droplets forming on the metal beams. The sound of slow, rhythmic movement carried from deeper inside. When they reached the main chamber, they found cages empty. The body that had been frozen in metal and ice was gone. Only fragments remained, melted and fused into the floor. The heat was rising fast. Laird whispered, "It is loose." Hale's eyes swept the shadows. "Stay together." A sharp clatter broke the quiet. A section of pipe fell from the ceiling and hit the ground, spinning. Then came the breathing again, closer than before. A shape moved beyond the machinery, low and fast, circling. Avery raised his rifle. There, the creature lunged from the dark. This time they saw it clearly in the glow of their lights. Its skin had changed, darker now, pulsing with red veins that glimmered under the beam. Its limbs were stronger, more defined, and its mouth opened in the raw snarl that shook the chamber. Eel fired first, driving it back. Jensen and Laird joined, their shots ripping through steam and shadows. The creature shrieked and retreated toward the tunnel mouth, wounded but not destroyed. They followed, firing as they ran. It burst out into the open snow, leaving a trail of dark fluid behind. For the first time, the daylight struck it fully. The creature screamed, clawing at its face as smoke rose from its flesh. Then, another sound cut through the chaos, a heavy, guttural call that came from above. The yeti appeared on the ridge, moving with deliberate power. It descended in long strides, its breath visible in the cold air. It ignored the soldiers and went straight for the wounded creature. The two collided with a force that shook the ground. Snow exploded in every direction. The team scrambled for cover as the beasts tore into each other, white fur against blackened skin, the sound of bone and ice splitting through the air. The yeti was larger but slower, using its weight to pin the other down. The mutated creature writhed and lashed out, claws raking through fur and flesh. Hale rose to his knees, watching through the haze. "Hold your fire," he said. "Let it finish." The battle raged for what felt like minutes. Both figures locked in a brutal rhythm. Then the yeti drove the creature backward into a frozen embankment. With one final strike, it crushed the mutant's chest beneath a massive fist. The sound cracked through the valley like thunder. The smaller creature went still. Steam rose from its body, then nothing. But the yeti stood over it, breathing heavily, blood streaking the white of its coat. It looked at the soldiers again, eyes dark but clear, and stepped back from the corpse. For a moment, no one moved. The wind returned, light at first, curling the snow around them. Hale lowered his weapon and stepped forward slowly. "You do not have to run," he said quietly, though he knew the creature could not understand the words. "It is over." The yeti turned toward him, head tilting slightly, as if it did understand, then looked at the mountains beyond. It let out a low, deep call that rolled across the peaks. Somewhere in the distance, faint echo answered, another of its kind. Then, with slow, steady motion, it climbed away toward the horizon, disappearing into the white. They buried the remains of the mutant near the ridge and marked the location for command. Hale wrote the final entry in his logbook as the sun began to set behind the mountains. Encounter concluded. Host by organism neutralized, not of natural origin. Secondary entity confirmed non-aggressive and possibly indigenous. Recommend classification as protected biological anomaly. Immediate containment or interference not advised. He closed the book and slipped it into his pack. Avery stood beside him, watching the light fade. "You think anyone will believe it?" "Probably not," Hale said. "But maybe that's for the best." They began the long descent south, the valley falling away behind them. The sky turned from gray to pale gold, and for the first time in days, the cold seemed to ease. Hale looked back once more at the peaks. Somewhere out there the yeti was alive, guarding what was left of its home. As the team moved down through the pass, a final gust of wind swept across the mountains. It carried with it a sound, low and distant, like the echo of a call fading into the snow. It was not a cry of fear or pain, but something older, a sound of endurance. Hale paused and listened until it was gone. Then he nodded once, quietly, and kept walking.